Hello and welcome to Meet the Candidate, LA Mayor Edition. I'm Austin Cross, host of Midday All Things Considered on KPCC. These events are part of coverage made possible through support by the Committee for Greater LA in partnership with the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation and the Weingart Foundation. Tonight, we're talking with Gina Viola. And throughout the event, we invite you to share your questions for the candidate. You could submit yours through the Q&A function located on the right side of your screen. Live captioning is also available. Just go ahead and hit CC on your screen. And now, let's meet the candidate. Gina Viola is a community organizer and activist who spent years organizing around LGBTQ rights with AIDS Project Los Angeles. She also was a mentor and board member for the organization Girls and Gangs. She has more recently turned her focus toward racial and social justice work, and now she wants to be LA's next mayor. Gina Viola, thank you so much for coming in this evening.
Thank you for having me.
As we begin, I think some introduction is necessary because you are one of the newer faces to LA politics. Who is Gina Viola?
So I am a business owner, a mother, and a community organizer and activist. Not necessarily in that order. I am the proud mom of 2 LAUSD school public children, and I decided to run for mayor because I had no one to vote for. So that's why I'm here.
And at this point, is campaigning for mayor, has that taken on like a full-time capacity for you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm very grateful to my business partner who is letting me put my business life aside for a few months to be able to run this campaign.
Wonderful. Well, let's start tonight with the topic of policing. You have been vocal about defunding them and reallocating that money elsewhere, and you say the process will be gradual. So first of all, what precisely do you mean by defund?
I mean refund the people, refund the community. If you drive across Los Angeles, you can see and feel the inequities in our city. The parks in Watts don't look like the parks on the west side, and that's not fair. After-school programs, education, all of these things we have no problem defunding when money gets tight. But when it comes to law enforcement, their budget has grown 52% in the last 10 years. And that comes at great expense to these communities that have been divested from for many decades.
So what benchmarks would you use to determine how much you take away from the LAPD budget each year?
Well, I think the first thing I would do is work with the city controller to locate where the budget is inefficient and overbloated. I think we can already see that there's a lot of money that's wasted in the LAPD budget, and they already get 50% of our monies. In fact, 50% of the federal COVID dollars that came to our city were taken by the LAPD.
When you say defund, that means reducing the budget, and by how much are you thinking?
Well, it's a process, right? One of the things I've signed is the No New Cops Pledge from the People's Budget Los Angeles. So that's the start. Not hiring any more police officers is where we begin.
So you've said that supported people and communities don't commit crimes, but strategically it seems like you would need the money to support those communities and bring crime levels down first before a wide swath of Angelenos would get on board with the idea that police are needed. So how much investment do you estimate is necessary up front to see a drop in crime rates first?
I would say we need $1 billion. We need $1 billion in community care immediately so that we can have violence prevention workers, domestic violence workers, social workers, community outreach workers in our neighborhoods. And we can start investing in things like the Green New Deal Los Angeles, Sunrise Movements, so that we can actually make our communities healthier at the same time as well.
So it does sound like it would take funds in addition to the police budget, in the interim at least. Do you know where that money would come from?
From the police budget.
So,
That's something that needs to be reallocated, and it needs to be put under a microscope, because right now Stop LAPD Spying has been asking for documentation on the budget for the LAPD for years. In fact, they've had to sue the city of Los Angeles to see all of the pages of documents, supporting documents with the budget. So somebody needs to go through that budget with a fine-tooth comb and find all of the monies that can be reallocated immediately.
So you would need to work with the city council on a budget. At least 3 candidates are running on a defund platform, much like yourself, but that's not a majority of the 15-person council. So how would you keep those promises to defund if the council is not on board?
Well, I do have veto power over that budget as well.
You do.
Hmm.
And how would you use that then?
Well, the biggest power the mayor has is submitting the budget, right, to city council. That's the process. It starts with the mayor. The mayor sends it off to city council. It goes through the budget and finance committee, and then to the full council, and then it comes back to the mayor for signature.
Yes. So now you could veto, but let's say now you and the council disagree, of course. You would just single-handedly reapportion that money yourself then.
I don't think I'm going to have to. I think that once people dig into the true numbers in the policing budget, they're going to want to reallocate some of those funds. You know, each council district has complained over and over again about the deficiencies in each of their council districts, most of them anyway. And once people understand that healthy, resourced communities are safe communities, they might change their mind.
So you would take $1 billion from the current $11 billion budget
Yes,
to do that.
yes.
So you've suggested a multi-pronged response to things like domestic violence calls, and currently it is police who would go to those calls. Would you replace the officers one-to-one, or do you foresee the ranks of the responders outnumbering the total number of officers?
I'm confused by the question, I'm
So
sorry.
let's try this. Remove one officer, replace them with one responder. Is that the thought, or is it maybe one responder? in
I
place
think
of
every
3
neighborhood's
police
going to be a little bit different in what their needs are. You know, what I would like to see is I would like to see us have a community academy. Much like the police academy, replace it with a community outreach academy. So when kids are graduating high school in their neighborhoods, they can do a 20-week program at a community academy to learn how to be a community responder, a community outreach worker. I think you can see that what's most needed in our city right now is care, right? If you look at what CD4, Council District 4, has done with their staff, almost all of their staff at this point are outreach workers into the community. So they can work with folks in a compassionate way to move them off of the streets into transitional housing on a path to permanent housing. This is something we need more of.
And CD4 is Nithya Raman's district,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
So at this point, would you consider raising taxes to meet these goals if, say, you cannot get that funding from the LAPD budget?
I
as
think there's
quickly as you
plenty
can?
of money. It's how we choose to spend it. We don't need to raise taxes. We're already a heavily taxed city. It's how we allocate the funding. Again, we will defund education. We will defund mental health. We will defund health services. Why can't we take a look at the policing budget? If you look at the charts and graphs, it eats up the majority of our unrestricted budget.
Do you think that defunding the police is something that the majority of Angelenos could get behind, though, as a concept? I think you're the only candidate who's running on that platform.
Yes, I think if people could give it a chance to understand it's not just about taking away, it's about what comes next, what we build to replace it. And we've got community organizations all over the city already doing this, right? We're just not resourcing them to do it better. We have violence prevention workers that get very little. Some of them make minimum wage, right? And I recently heard Steve Soberoff in a police commission meeting say that the LAPD workers are not paid enough to live in the city of Los Angeles. He wants to raise money to subsidize their rent. And all I can think of are the violence prevention workers, the social workers who went to school, took out big loans to go to school. And now where is their subsidy for housing?
Well, I would like to remind the people at home that they can submit a question for Gina Viola through the Q&A function located on the right side of the screen. And now let's move on to homelessness. And let's watch this brief introduction from Ethan Ward, who covers homelessness for KPCC and LAist.
Hi, I'm Ethan Ward. I used to be unhoused. I now cover the homelessness crisis. There are roughly 66,000 people experiencing homelessness on any given night in Los Angeles. Those numbers could rise when we learn the results of our 2022 count later this spring. Some are young students, they're over the age of 55, they're transgender, some are working full-time jobs. They're living in their cars, in RVs, and on the streets. Voters responded to the increased visibility of homelessness by voting for measures that would build more apartments for people experiencing homelessness. But those units are coming online slowly, and there aren't enough shelter beds. There have been lawsuits. Some have called for the homelessness crisis to be treated as a natural disaster with federal emergency responses. One thing is certain: homelessness is the biggest issue on the minds of housed and unhoused voters this year.
Well, let's start this section with a question from one of our community members, and I would like to call up Janae Williams to ask our candidate a question.
Hi,
Hi.
nice to meet you. So what is your comprehensive plan to address homelessness?
Well, I have a housing first plan, okay? I think housing is a human right. And I think part of the problem that we've had is we haven't reckoned with the U.S. housing policy of the 20th century, which is deeply rooted in racism. It was wealth creation for white people, while it was wealth extraction from black people explicitly and people of color in general. And until we contend with some of those policies and that's what they're rooted in, we'll just keep on this hamster wheel. It's about looking into that policy, addressing the racism, and then also taking government land and building social and public housing on it. We have the funding for it. There's an incredible amount of funding coming into the city right now for houselessness. Federal, state, county, city. If we amass a war chest of those funds, we can build our way out of this. We can build micro homes. LA Can has the most wonderful plan for micro homes, sustainable micro homes called Eco Hoods. I would put money towards that as an end game solution. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I want to ask you about some of that funding, looking specifically at Proposition HHH, that's the $1.2 billion bond measure designed to create 10,000 new apartments over a decade for people experiencing homelessness. We're halfway through that timeline, and nearly all of the money is committed, yet only about 1,000 Triple H funded units have opened. So what went wrong, and what would you do differently?
Yeah, it was abysmal failure of execution. I mean, I think what we ended up with were FEMA-style tents of congregate shelters. A bridge home, I call a bridge to nowhere. We started with the transitional plan before having a plan for housing people. And now we're doubling down on that by building, encampments with tiny sheds on them for people to be in. This is not housing. A big part of the problem is the revenue structure, the public-private partnership that we rely on to finance these apartments to be built is what cripples us. And what we end up doing is shuttling public dollars into the private sector instead of the other way around.
So units did cost $500,000 to build. Latest estimate looked like it was around $800,000. I mean, is there a specific way that you would prevent that waste? You talk about the public-private partnership, but is there some other way to oversee that, to make sure that these units aren't coming in so expensive and that money isn't getting wasted?
Absolutely. We need true public housing. We need true publicly funded housing. So, the problem with the public-private partnership is the private sector needs one thing: profit, right? So somebody has to profit, somebody has to get wealthy. That's why those units cost $500,000 and now the estimate is $800,000. LA Can's Eco Hoods can be built for about $110,000 per house. It's a little house. It's got a bathroom, it's got a bedroom, it's got a kitchen. They're sustainable, and it's possible to do it. In fact, they're raising private funds to do it now.
The LA County Board of Supervisors today voted to establish its own homelessness department, and that could signal the beginning of the end for the LA Homeless Services Authority, which has been providing services for both the county and the city of LA. If the county pulls out of LAHSA, what should the city do?
The city and the county are going to have to work together to solve this. And like I said, amassing the revenue streams to deal with this is the first step. I am exhausted, as are the people of this city, at just having new agencies come in to handle something. Why wouldn't we empower an agency that already has the structure in place to do it? But the problem is there hasn't been the housing to place people in. We need to decide that housing is a human right. And we also need to deal with the racism built into the U.S. housing policy. Otherwise, we will just keep spinning our wheels. It doesn't matter how many departments you create.
I mean, one thing that stands out here, though, is that, and I've asked a lot of the candidates the same question at this point, but You have this idea once you amass this money. What do you think prevented the previous mayor from doing what you're thinking of doing?
I don't think he had the political will to do it. I think he was more concerned in the partnership aspect of it. You know, he was beholden to developers. He was beholden to the party that ran him. And I'm not backed by any party. I'm not backed by the Democrats. The only people I'm beholden to are the people donating to my campaign $24 at a time.
Some candidates have proposed like a czar, somebody to oversee this. Would you personally oversee the funding, or would you appoint somebody to do that?
No, I would oversee it myself in conjunction with City Council. I want to empower the City Council in each district to have somebody in their office that works with me on this.
So I want to ask you about Project Roomkey, because in the past, activists called on Mayor Eric Garcetti to use his emergency powers, especially during the pandemic, to seize hotel rooms and provide more housing for people. Would you seize properties to house people? Would you consider that?
Absolutely, absolutely. LAUSD is the second largest landholder in the city, and there are plenty of large empty buildings, even some school sites that could very easily be repurposed for transitional housing. So I would absolutely do that. That was an abysmal failure to not take the opportunity that FEMA provided us by being able to purchase hotels. We were going to be refunded 100% for those hotels. And his plan was to put 15,000 people in the hotels, and at the height of that, there were about 4,400 in it. So clearly, again, this is a political will problem, right? And also not empowering the council districts to have the right outreach to folks on the street so they could make meaningful connection with folks and give them significant placing, you know, while we're waiting for housing to be built.
You mentioned working with the city council on homelessness. Do you think any current council members have handled this issue well in their district?
Absolutely. I think Nithya Raman has done an incredible job. She has, again, empowered her staff to go out into the community, get to know the folks that are living on the streets, and know what their needs are, and know what it takes to get them compassionately transitioned into a transitional safe space. She doesn't use the police. She's not forcing anyone. To my knowledge, she hasn't listed any 4118 sites. 4118 is the sit-lie. It's like illegal to sit, lie, or sleep anywhere in the city of Los Angeles that a council member decides, the addresses that they submit. This is cruel and inhumane, and one of the first things that I would do when I was mayor is undo 4118.
So before we move on to housing, I want to try to get a number on record, because many of the candidates in this race have estimated how many people they could house or shelter in the first few years. Do you have a target number?
In the first few years?
Let's say, yeah, first few years. I know that it's very easy for people to say in 4 years, but maybe in the first year, we've heard commitments on that. Do you have an idea of
With
what you would do in
eminent
the first
domain,
year?
I think we can house everybody within a year. I do.
House all the homeless in 1 year.
In transitional housing, while we're building permanent housing, yes.
Well, I would like to remind people at home that they can submit a question for Gina Fiola through the Q&A function located on the right side of the screen. And with that, let's move to housing. My colleague David Wagner covers that topic for KPCC and LAist, and he sets the scene in this video.
I'm David Wagner, and I cover housing for KPCC and LAist. California has the highest poverty rate in the nation, mainly due to the cost of housing. Surveys during the pandemic revealed that about 2/3 of LA tenants are burdened by high rents, and more than 40% live in overcrowded homes. Most LA residents are renters, but the city reserves 3/4 of its residential land for single-family homes most Angelenos cannot afford. State regulators recently rejected LA's plans to accommodate new housing. They said the city failed to address long-standing patterns of racial segregation. Many renters lost work during the pandemic and fell behind on their rent. But more than a year after the city launched its rent relief program, most applicants are still waiting for funds. Promises to curb rent hikes and displacement have not stopped tenants from facing huge increases and threats of eviction. At the same time, small landlords say they've been unable to pay their mortgages after being cut off from the promised relief.
So I want to come back to public housing. You mentioned it earlier, and you have advocated for that as a major response to the housing crisis. But it's an old approach to an old problem. So how do you revive that approach without creating a modern version of the projects?
Well, I think social housing, in addition to public housing, is really needed as well, so that you have mixed income people living together in those buildings. So I think that's one of the solutions to it. But, you know, the other problem with the challenge with the public housing is, as we defunded those things, we replaced it with policing, right? So that's how the public housing got a bad rap. We just started over-policing those areas and neighborhoods, and that, to me, is the true challenge with public housing today.
Well, how would you ensure that these are not just lumped into communities that are already struggling with high population density? That's also what tends to happen with these.
We need to spread them out to all the corners of the city. You know, every district needs to have some social and public housing in it. In addition, you know, 75% of the rental stock now is owned by big and corporate landlords. And that's also a problem, and that's another way to tackle this. You know, we really need some strong tenant protections, and we need some rent control.
Are there any models that you look to for this social housing idea that you mentioned?
Yeah, there's endhomelessnessnow.com. They have a really wonderful program for social housing online.
So a lot of people are still recovering financially from the pandemic, and a lot of Angelenos are just one paycheck away from same kind of uncertainty, maybe losing the place where they live. How do you plan to stop more people from falling into homelessness?
We need to take a look at our rental stock, and we need to take a look at what's happening with the fact that 3/4 of it is owned by big landlords and corporate landlords that are largely unregulated. Also, the affordable housing units that we do have in the city are getting ready to sunset in many areas. If you look at what's happening in Chinatown with the Hillside Via, this is terrible. We need to make sure that these affordable units are in perpetuity. They can't have a time frame on them, 10 years, 20 years. I've talked to some folks in the Valley that are living 2 to 3 families in an apartment, with each person, you know, each adult working anywhere from 40 to 50 hours a week. And they are worried about being evicted at the end of this crisis. And we need to, you know, we need to make sure that tenants have representation. That needs to be a thing as well.
So coming back to your plans to spread out public housing and create more affordable housing, there are, this word has come up in every conversation, the NIMBYs, the not in my backyard people. How do you convince them to go along with these plans?
It's an education piece, right? I think once we educate folks that when anyone in our society is not well, none of us are well. So we need to reframe the thinking about what it means to be in community with folks and care for folks properly.
But if they're unmoved by this education process, are you willing to work with them to avoid costly court battles?
I'm willing to work with them, but I'm also willing to, you know, use some force if I have to, you know, until once you get a unit in your neighborhood. Let's say we build a social housing unit, right, in your neighborhood. In Hollywood, for example, we have a parking lot that CD4 is going to build on. When she came to our neighborhood council and said, I'm going to put some housing on this parking lot, our neighborhood council said to her, can we put retail at the bottom for those folks to work in as well? So I think there are solutions that can work even for the strictest of NIMBYs if we spend the time to educate folks about what it means to care for each other.
Just to check on this force that you might feel that you have to use, what might that look like?
These are good questions. I'm
We
sorry.
try to dig deep here.
It's the eminent domain again. You know, there's a lot of city and state and county lands that if we have to repurpose them and use them for social housing, that's something we just have to do. And again, I don't, you know, it's not a matter of getting people to bend to your will. It's a matter of having conversations that last long enough to get people to understand there's another side to every story.
You talked about the large property owners, but many small apartment buildings across the country are owned by individuals. And according to our reporting, many mom and pop landlords are still waiting on thousands in rent relief from the state. What's your message to smaller landlords who depend on the income they receive from their units, who are worried about their future, who may be behind on their mortgages right now?
Yeah, there are COVID dollars still out there for landlords to take in California, absolutely. So I would encourage folks to make sure they're following up with their representatives so that they're getting those dollars they're due. In addition, I would point out again that COVID relief funds that came to each of the municipalities from the federal government went to law enforcement. And that wasn't just in Los Angeles, that was across the country.
Well, now, so the support for those landlords, a lot of that was administered by the state, and the deadline to apply for that has now passed. But when it comes to those smaller landlords who are, concerned, and they're facing this bureaucracy, they're waiting on these funds to come in, do you have a plan to, I suppose, how would you work with small landlords, I think would be the question that I'd want to ask you here.
Well, the state just announced that they have a $68 billion budget surplus. So I think that's the first thing I would do, is I would use my bully pulpit, if it were, to talk to the governor of our state to make sure some of that funding came down to those small mom and pops.
Now, a lot of people may be unfamiliar with that social housing model that you mentioned earlier. Would that be a certain number of units held reserved for people at varying income levels? How would that work?
Yeah, they're usually in percentages. You have 25% at no income, 25% at low income, and 50% at market rate. Something like this with a structure. And if you have some retail at the bottom, that rounds it out nicely as well.
Again, I would like to remind people at home, if they have a question for Gina Viola, you can do it through the Q&A function. Go ahead and submit it right there. And now we're going to change to systemic racism, which I've heard you speak about quite a lot. To get us into that, let's watch a video from my colleague, Josie Wong.
I'm Josie Huang, and I cover Asian American communities in Southern California. There are dozens of Asian diasporas here, and the issues they face are so wide-ranging. Gentrification, inadequate housing, immigration policies that separate families for decades, wage theft on the backs of immigrants who keep our society running, and also language access. Many have also encountered racism. In the last few years, we've seen that racism escalate into violence directed at some of our most vulnerable community members. LA is celebrated for its racial diversity, but it's also one of the most segregated cities in this country. It's a place where time and time again, we've seen systemic racism rear itself. Me and my colleagues at KPCC and LAist have long reported on public demands to restructure policing and to make more strides towards equity in education, housing, and wages. Being mayor of LA means having to confront all of it.
During the pandemic, you might know that hate crimes against Asian Americans rose by 76% in LA County. And according to a survey released in March, 2/3 of Asian Americans in the county are worried about being the victim of a racial attack. What can you do as mayor to ensure that Angelenos of color can feel safe when they're out and about?
Again, it's acknowledging where the problem comes from. White supremacy and systemic racism count on pitting races against one another. So we really need to launch education campaigns about what that means. But we also need to look at the policies that were founded upon these white supremacist ideals and be willing to dive in and tackle some of those things. I received an email from an Asian woman just today, actually, who said she read my website and she was very excited about it, except that I didn't mention the Asian violence specifically. And one of the reasons I cited to her for that, because I am concerned about hate crimes on all races, absolutely. And the reason my website focuses so much on the anti-Black racism has been the Black erasure that's happened in Los Angeles. There were almost 1 million Black people living in the city of Los Angeles in the year 2000. And in the 2020 census, there were less than 400,000 Black Angelenos left. And that's the only demographic that has seen a decline in population. And I would say a catastrophic one at that.
So on that, we just marked 30 years since the start of the LA Uprising, and Loyola Marymount is out with a survey based on conversations with Angelenos. They spoke to about 2,000 of them, and more than 2/3 of those people they spoke to said it is very likely or somewhat likely that within 5 years we'll see riots or civil unrest in LA like what happened in 1992. What does that tell you?
It tells me that we haven't reckoned with our past. We haven't reckoned with our past. We haven't done anything to repair it, and we're not making inroads with it. When black people are being priced out, environmental racism, they're being choked out, and they're being terrorized out by police violence, this is something we need to address, and we need to address immediately. Otherwise, I agree, we will be out in the streets again.
So how do you see yourself helping to facilitate those conversations that are necessary, or what role do you see yourself playing in that specific?
I do. Well, what I see is I see myself putting, people of color at the highest levels of my administration, not just in a diversity office with no teeth and nothing really to legislate. I want to hire folks of all colors from all walks of Los Angeles at the highest levels of my administration to work with me, telling me how we fix this.
So you've spoken about, wanting to make sure that Angelenos of color feel safe. You've also spoken about reducing the size of the police force. Is there a way you can ensure that people remain safe with a reduced police force?
Yes, I firmly believe that resourced, healthy communities don't have crime, right? What makes crime? Poverty. Poverty is what creates crime. We need to alleviate poverty throughout the city, and we are in the wealthiest city in the wealthiest country in the world. There's no reason why so many people should be living in the poverty levels that we have. Your video even referenced, we have the highest rates of poverty in this city. That's shameful, and that's a policy decision.
So another topic we want to take up tonight is education. And even though the city does not have direct involvement with running LAUSD, both mayors Garcetti and Villaraigosa carved out roles for the city to play in education. So let's hear from my colleague, Mariana Dale.
I'm Mariana Dale, and I report on early childhood as part of our education team. Many families rely on a network of caregivers to raise their kids, one that's been stretched thin during the pandemic. Even as the state expands a free preschool program for 4-year-olds, wide swaths of Los Angeles are considered childcare deserts. Families struggle to find affordable care, and at the same time, workers who are largely Black and brown women often do not make a living wage and are leaving the field. This is important because critical brain development happens in the first years of life. There are consequences when children are not cared for in nurturing and safe environments. Research estimates tens of thousands of LA teenagers and young adults are neither working nor in school. The mayor can play a role in ensuring families have what they need to help children grow and thrive.
So according to a study by UC Berkeley, schools in Los Angeles are becoming increasingly segregated due to past policy decisions, like those that dictate where public and subsidized housing can be, and that's contributed to widening achievement gaps along economic and racial lines. How would you address this problem?
Again, our budgets are they're a moral document. And what we've seen is the education budget shrink and shrink and shrink over time. If you look at this most recent budget that the mayor just submitted, the funding for youth development and community investment doesn't even register on the graph. So we need to reinvest those funds into systems of care, and education is a big one. It's a big one, and the first one that gets defunded.
Back in 2018, San Francisco voters narrowly approved a tax on commercial rents to boost the educational quality of child care programs and do things like pay child care workers more and better prepare kids in low-income households for kindergarten. Given the state of child care, would you consider a tax like that?
Again, I'm not really moving for taxes, right? I want a reallocation of our funds. And mentioning wages, I am pushing for a $39 an hour living wage for folks. And small businesses would be subsidied for that, but large corporations can and should be paying that to live in the city of Los Angeles. And I would like to see those young youth development workers making that kind of money.
I'm going to ask you more about the minimum wage in just a second, but we have another question from our audience member, and I'd like to call up Eric Brightwell to ask his question from the candidate.
My question is, what is your primary means of transportation? And if the answer is car, why should voters take seriously anything you say about either public transportation or global warming? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I do have a car. I drive a hydrogen car, actually. It's my third hydrogen car. But I also take the metro and the bus. So I use a variety of modalities to get around the city.
So, keeping with that a little bit, actually, how do you plan to address the climate crisis in Los Angeles? And I'll say that coming up on these events, a major complaint that I had heard from people about many of the candidates is most of them did not have climate plans either on their website or that they'd never spoken about them. So, what's your plan to address it, and how do you plan to fund those efforts? And I'm going to guess it might be another reallocation. Seems to be the word of the evening, but let me just ask.
Yes. So we need to listen to the youth. The youth have been yelling at us for years, right? That we need to do something about this. We're willing to celebrate Greta Thunberg with, certificates and days of rest, but we're not willing to actually do anything about it. And the Sunrise Movement LA has put forth the Green New Deal Los Angeles, which is great. It's exactly what we need, and we definitely do have the money to fund it. Again, reallocating funds that have been, when we don't have clean drinking water in Watts, 86% of the drinking water in Watts is not clean, right? But yet you're going to send a good portion of policing down there when folks are already unhealthy. So why can't we consider that that is the crisis of the day, and that is something we need to put funding into right away?
So, of the policies spoken about in that Green Deal, could you name a few of them that you might prioritize right off the bat?
Yeah, the street traffic, like limiting the street traffic is one of the things, like taking away lanes of traffic to cars, increasing the metro bus lines, because right now we've had a big decrease in ridership, and then making public transportation free.
Many low-income families of color live in parts of the city, near oil wells, near the Port of LA, other areas where the pollution is high. And of course, that can have some very negative health effects. What would you do to ensure that Angelenos can live in neighborhoods that are safe from a health standpoint?
Right on my website, it says we would abolish fossil fueling immediately. I know there's a plan right now to sunset that, but that's at the political will of whoever is in charge. So that's something that needs to happen, and it needs to happen immediately.
We do have a question from an audience member that I'll ask you. It was submitted online. Will you increase funding for tree planting and tree care?
Absolutely. I think we need more tree canopy. Again, when you drive across the city and see the inequities, I heard somebody recently say the trees were removed for the shuttle to move through town a couple of years ago. But they were actually removed decades before so that the LAPD could have good visual of South LA. That's one of the reasons why we lost so much tree canopy. So that's something that needs to be corrected.
The aerospace, tech, and film industries, I'll say this is another question submitted by one of our viewers. Those industries are known for entrenched employment discrimination. So they want to know, how can our mayor ensure that industries honor equal opportunity rights?
One of the biggest frustrations I'm starting to see in my email box every day is from different industries telling me exactly that. I have a construction worker who says his people are not being cared for at all. They're working 12, 14 hours, sometimes no break. I had another email from somebody in the esports world saying those folks, when they're trying to make a deadline, are working sometimes, they're sleeping on their desks, basically. So I think we really need a robust look at what our labor practices are throughout the city, and that's something the city attorney should be paying close attention to.
Another viewer asks, my husband is a bike commuter and I worry for his safety on Los Angeles streets. What are your ideas for improving bike safety in Los Angeles?
Well, I've signed the Streets for All 25 by 25 pledge, and that has a good deal of bike lane protection in it, and something I care deeply about as well. As I want to remove traffic lanes, we need to replace those with bicyclers, and we need to make sure we do it safely.
Another viewer question is, what policies would you enact to ensure that everyone in LA has access to affordable, reliable, and high-speed internet?
I think we do need to have some government internet. I think it's long since time, especially when so many of our forms now, our government forms, are online. I think internet should be a right, and I would look into government-sponsored internet.
Then I think we can squeeze in one more audience question for now, then I'll come back to those in a second. But how do community land trusts and housing cooperatives factor into your housing plan?
I'm very excited about community land trusts. I saw one in Detroit not too long ago that where they had purchased a whole corner, and the idea was to build 4 units, 4 buildings with multifamily housing in them, with the center being a courtyard, a community courtyard, and again being part owned by the community in perpetuity. And I'm very excited about that aspect of things. I'm not sure that it's part of the solution when we build social housing and public housing. The community land trusts absolutely go along with that.
So I want to ask you about some of your other ideas and proposals, starting with minimum wage, which you mentioned earlier. I said we'd come back to it, and here we are.
Here we are.
You say the minimum wage should be $39 an hour. That's a little over $81,000 a year for a full-time worker. How did you arrive at that number?
So actually, that number was on the People's Pledge that I signed. Benito Flores of the Reclaimers, the El Sereno Reclaiming Our Homes, went around and made a pitch to candidates running to sign a pledge with him. And one of the conditions for that pledge was a $39 minimum wage hour. And there is all sorts of documentation online to support that that is a true living wage for actually 2021. So it hasn't even been adjusted for 2022. But if you look at one of the things I want to say to people when they ask me that is I want to say, what do you make per hour? But nobody likes having that question asked back to them.
Well, after a hard-fought push, the city council approved a $15 minimum wage in 2015. I can tell you personally that that's not really a lot of money, because when I started in radio in 2010, $15 an hour was about the standard. And I've heard from people since that same job still pays $15 an hour. So I understand, because it has been 12 years, and
Right.
that has not moved at all.
Right.
But even to get to $15 an hour, the mayor had to work with the city council. He was actually proposing something lesser. Then they said, okay, we're going to phase in $15 an hour. You would also need the council's approval for an increase. So do you see this being gradual over time?
I think it has to be gradual over time. However, again, this rate is for 2021. When we did get that $15 an hour minimum wage, it was gradual. It took a long time to actually arrive at the $15 an hour, and by the time we did, we know it was woefully inefficient. It was never going to get us where we needed to be. With our rising, we spent a good deal of time talking today about our housing costs. So we already know that folks are being priced out of the city. 80% of city workers don't even live in the city of Los Angeles, and they make $39 an hour.
So how long of a period do you think would make sense for phasing up? Because I believe we just raised our minimum wage again a little bit, but it's still less than half of $39 an hour. How many years would it take to get there?
I think it's something that would need to be subsidied, right? So again, we'd have to means test businesses to see, can they afford this $39 an hour minimum wage? And we know that folks like Walmart, who pay woeful wages, those workers oftentimes qualify for food stamps and welfare. So we're already subsidizing big companies because they're not paying their employees enough. So I think we can move rather quickly on this. I think this is something we can implement within the first couple of years.
There might be somebody out there wondering, though, if we're paying $39 an hour, wouldn't we see a flood of people moving here that maybe we're not equipped for? Even more people coming to Los Angeles.
With the price of housing in Los Angeles, I don't see a flood of people moving here that quickly for the minimum wage.
So you mentioned small business owners. A $39 minimum wage could be daunting for them. How would you address those concerns?
Definitely with a subsidy. Much like we've done these pilot programs of universal basic income, we need to look at it like that. This is a form of universal basic income if we're supplementing, the employer's ability to be able to pay these wages.
So a week ago in an interview with KCRW's Madeline Brand, she asked you how much that would cost, those subsidies. And you didn't have an estimate at the time, but I'm wondering, do you have a better sense now of how much the city would need to pay to make that a reality?
No, I mean, I still, so many things have happened since Madeline Brand's interview that I haven't had an opportunity to dig deeper into those numbers. I'll be honest about that. Part of it has been, this week has had a lot of activity happening. What happened on Sunday to Dr. Abdullah at Cal State LA is heavily weighing on my mind and leading up to, being excluded from the debate, even though I'm polling in the top 5, has me very distracted to be able to dig into numbers, but it is something I will do.
Well, roughly, and I understand there has been a lot going on. We've certainly had to cover that happening, and we're looking into that. We continue to look into that, but is there an estimate of, would it be more than $1 million a day, you think? Less than $1 million a day? I don't want to play too much high-low with you here, but just to get a rough idea of how much a city would have to shell out to make that.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's in the $500 million a year.
$500 million a
Yeah.
year. And I know a lot of reallocation is kind of the idea here. Would that also be $500 million reallocated?
Yes, reallocated.
Any idea? I'm guessing I might know what you're going to say, but any idea where you might get that $500 million?
I'm going to be taking that from the policing budget.
Might have guessed that, I think, at this point. But I am curious, if you were to do that and, you also want to support communities, is there enough for all of those things?
There is absolutely enough for all of these things. I know it is really difficult to think that because we've been living the way we've been living for so long. We can't imagine it any other way. But if you really spent time looking at the numbers and seeing how disproportionately we are spending all of our funding on policing, there is money for the rest of it.
So as you likely know, LA does not have a strong mayor like New York City. So how confident are you that you could work with, if you had one, a divided council to implement your agenda? And I know you mentioned your veto power earlier, but this is, mayor's got to play the long game sometimes, so you got to save your powder sometimes. Do you think that you could work with them if there were people who are maybe not as interested in divesting from the police?
I do. I plan to be a working mayor. I don't often see our mayor at city council meetings, and that's something I would definitely be doing. I plan to work with each council district very closely to have participatory budgeting sessions in each of the 15 council districts, as well as with community coalitions throughout the city. So I plan to be a hands-on working mayor.
So talk to me about the team of people who you're working with to develop these policies. Who are the people who you turn to for advice and who you will maybe want to bring on board if you became the mayor?
So I've been working in coalition space for several years now. I'm part of the People's Budget Los Angeles, and we're a coalition of about 30 organizations led by Black Lives Matter Los Angeles. And many of the folks in that coalition space have gotten me to this point here. And I would be working with them very closely.
Of the people that you're working with, obviously the mayor operates like a CEO, so there's a lot happening. There's a lot from a political and a managerial perspective. Do you have a sense of the people who you would want to bring on board?
I haven't gotten there yet because I filed to run on the last day and the last hour, so we have been running a sprint ever since I did file to run for mayor. But I have been a business owner for 25 years, and I own a staffing company. So I have 1,000 employees that work with me throughout the state of California. And often I walk onto a trade show floor and I can have 100 people working with me, and several of them are supervisors. So I know how to work with people, and I know how to empower people to work with me.
So that last minute sign up that you just mentioned, why was it last minute? I'm curious.
Because in the end, I had no one to vote for. Truly, Karen Bass was my candidate when she filed. I endorsed immediately, and then her plans started coming out, and I was heartbroken, frankly. And I truly worried that the 5 mainstream candidates that the LA Times would have you believe are the only candidates running would set all the progress we've made with our social justice movement back, decades, including Karen Bass's.
So at that last minute, you decided it's got to be me?
I was asked. To run. I mean, there was a group of us. I asked a lot of people to run. Okay, so I saw a lot of folks I thought would be wonderful mayors, and I went to them one by one and asked them to run. And when the script got flipped back on me, I realized I couldn't not do something that I was asking so many other people to do. So I said yes.
So of all the people with something at stake, because I know that systemic racism is a subject that you're very passionate about, and you became very passionate about after Michael Brown, as you'd mentioned in previous conversations. What made you decide to be that person rather than, as you've said, you did ask around, you asked a few people, but obviously there are, voices of color out there that are also very active on the subject. So I don't want to say why you, not them, but I'm kind of curious as to how you came to that decision there.
I think a lot of folks were disappointed when Karen Bass started putting forth her plans. I think we had high hopes that she would be this candidate for us. But what I've seen now is the Democratic Party has such a hold on that campaign that I don't think that's possible. I mean, the Democrats have a supermajority up in Sacramento right now, and we couldn't get Medicare for all. We couldn't get CalCare passed, single payer, with a supermajority in Sacramento during a pandemic. So I worry relying on the Democratic Party to do right by us is detrimental to the health of all of us and well-being.
We have a question from the audience. They want to know, what are your thoughts on being the only candidate that is running on a People's First campaign?
I'm the only abolitionist candidate running. And my thoughts are, it's time for us to reimagine what care could look like if we truly, truly invested in our well-being. If we decided to make housing a human right. If we decided to make healthcare a human right. If we decided to make clean air, clean water to drink a human right. How wonderful it would be to go out your front door and once again say good morning to neighbors, because that has shifted in our city in the last 10 years. Folks don't say good morning anymore. Road rage is out of control. Folks are unhappy and they're tired. They're tired of dealing with the misuse and corruption of politicians in this city to the detriment of everybody living in it.
So you've never held elected office. What compelled you to start at such a high-profile race?
Well, I'm part of the People's Budget Los Angeles, and that's the biggest responsibility the mayor has, is presenting the budget. So, because I've had this question before, people are like, why didn't you start with city council? First, I like my city council member, Snithia Raman, CD4. I'm very happy with her. Why would I run against her? But I don't want to I want the opportunity to unify our city. I want the opportunity to present a budget that truly represents all the people of Los Angeles.
So if you are not elected mayor, do you foresee running for another office?
No.
You don't. So it's mayor or bust.
This is it. This is it. This is a city I love deeply, and I see it's in turmoil. And again, the opportunity to change the conversation, was what brought me here. And seeing how quickly I was able to rise in the polls and jump ahead of two, well-known politicians has really given me a sense of hope that we can do this and that folks really do want true change. They're ready.
Well, that is all the time that we actually have for this conversation with activist and mayoral candidate Gina Viola. Gina, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Join us tomorrow at 6 p.m. for my conversation with Councilman Joe Buscaino. Thursday, I'll speak to Mike Fewer, and on Friday, Rick Caruso. These events are part of coverage made possible through support by the Committee for Greater LA in partnership with the Conrad and Hilton Foundation and the Weingart Foundation. As a reminder, the primary election is June 7th, and ballots will be mailed to every registered voter in early May. Thank you so much for your time. I'm Austin Cross.